Jai Shri Ram. I'm starting with chapter 1, part 2, the left part of chapter 1. I had come to India from the United States as a devotee in a very intense religious sect. The Guru was the Guru, the final and the great savior. After only 2 weeks in his presence, I was clearly disillusioned about him and began to wonder about India on my own, still hoping to find the one true and the pure Guru somewhere. Several times in my wandering, someone would tell me of Maharajji, and then he was nearby. But I would not go, as I felt no particular pull. Finally, I was down near Bombay, still seeking the true Guru, when an old friend showed up. He looked so clear and light that before we even spoke, I determined to go to wherever it was he had just come from. He had just left Maharajji in Vrindavan. I packed my bag and was gone that afternoon. 24 hours later, I was before Maharajji. There were number of Westerners there. Maharajji did not speak to me, but he kept looking very intensely at my heart chakra, the psychic energy center in the heart area of the body. And what I kept hearing as a voice within me was that my search was over. I come home. I was sitting for several months in Buddhist meditation in Bodh Gaya. After two-thirds of the way through the second month, this funny looking little man started to appear in the upper right hand corner of my awareness. Even every so often he had smiled. I wonder who he was and just watched him come and go. Later, I began to suspect that it was Maharaji, whom I had heard about years before. At the end of the retreat, I opened a copy of the 100,000 songs of Milarepa, and a picture of Maharaji fell out. When we finally got to Vrindavan, where he was supposed to be, we found the gates of the temple locked. Finally, very sad that I had come all this way only to find the gates locked, I went across the streets and sat on the culvert. All of a sudden, I felt as if Maharaji had come leaping over the wall, for I was completely surrendered and filled with the greatest love I had ever experienced. I burst into tears. People passing by saw this crazy long haired Westerner sobbing his guts out. They just looked at me and smiled and continued on. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a clear sense of being home. There was absolutely no question, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. A month before, I couldn't have imagined such an experience. A month before, I couldn't have imagined such an experience, but here I was, so relieved, so happy. My heart seemed to have burst open. Shortly afterward, we were allowed into the temple. Maharaji asked me all the usual questions like who I was, where I was from, and what I did. And then suddenly I found myself bowing with my head on his feet and feeling totally right about it. And he was patting me on the head, saying something like, "Welcome, glad to see you made it, welcome abroad." All I wanted to do was to hang onto his feet and didn't care at all that this wasn't in any way consistent with my self-image. Ram. My wife had met Maharaji and had come to get me in America and bring me back to meet him. When we first went to see Maharaji, I was put off by what I saw. All these crazy Westerners wearing white clothes and hanging around a man in a blanket. More than anything else, I hated seeing Westerners touch his feet. On my first day there, he totally ignored me, but after the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh day, during which he also ignored me, I began to grow very upset. I felt no love from him. In fact, I felt nothing. I decided that my wife had been captured by some crazy cult. By the end of the week, I was ready to leave. We were staying at a hotel. We were staying at a hotel up in Nainital, and on the eighth day, I told my wife that I wasn't feeling well. I spent the day walking around the lake, thinking that if my wife was so involved in something that was clearly not for me, it must mean that our marriage was at an end. I looked at the flowers, the mountains, and the reflections in the lake, but nothing could dispel my depression. And then I did something that I had really never done in my adult life. I prayed. I asked God, what am I doing here? Who is this man? These people are all crazy. I don't belong here. Just then I remembered the pause. Just then I remembered the phrase. Had he but faith, he would not need miracles. Okay, God, I don't have any faith. Send me a miracle. Kept looking for a rainbow, but nothing happened. So I decided to leave the next day. The next morning, we took a taxi down to Kanchi to the temple to say goodbye. Although I didn't like Maharaji, I thought I had just be very honest and have it out with him. We got to Kanchi before anyone else was there, and we sat in front of the tucket wooden bed on the porch. Maharaji did not yet come out from inside the room. There was some fruit on the tucket, and one of that apple had fallen on the ground. So I bent over to pick it up. Just then Maharaji came out of his room and stepped on my hand, pinning me to the ground. So there I was on my knees touching his feet. In that position I detested. He looked down at me and asked, "Where were you yesterday?" Then he asked, "Were you at the lake?" He said lake in English. Then he said the word lake to me. I began to get this strange feeling at the base of my spine, and my whole body tingled. I felt very strange. He asked me, "What were you doing at the lake?" I began to feel very tight. Then he asked, "Were you horseback riding?" No. "Were you boating?" No. "Did you go swimming?" No. Then he leaned over and spoke quietly. "Were you talking to God? Did you ask for something?" When he did that, I felt apart and started to cry like a baby. He pulled me over and started pulling my beard and repeating, "Did you ask for something?" That really felt like my intentions. But then other had arrived, and they were around me, cursing me, and I realized that almost everyone there had gone through some experience like that. A trivial question such as "Where you were you at the lake yesterday?" which had no meaning to anyone else, shattered my perception of reality. I was clear to me that Maharaji saw right through all the illusions. He knew everything. By the way, the next thing he said to me was, "Will you write a book?" That was my welcome. After that, I just wanted to rub his feet. Ram. It was in London. I was on a bus with many empty seats. Then an old man carrying a blanket got on the bus and chose to sit on the window seat beside me, so that I had to stand up to let him in. This annoyed me somewhat, but as he sat down, he gave me such a sweet, gentle smile that I forgot my annoyance and sat thinking to myself, what a sweet old man. Before the bus came to the next stop on its route, I turned to look at him again, but he was gone. The bus had not stopped again since he had gotten on. How could he have gotten off without any standing to him to let him pass. Later, I went to India on the advice of a friend who had been there, and I saw a picture of Maharajji. It was the same man. I located Maharajji and found out that on the day I had seen him on the bus in London carrying a specific plain blanket, a woman in India had given Maharajji just such a blanket, which he was wearing the same day. The Indians also came to Maharajji with varying degrees of desires and readiness, but of them it was different. They had gone up in a culture in which holy beings abundant. The present, the and the parents of the most of them had had gurus. For the family, the guru was a combination of grandfather and worldly and spiritual guide, the reflection or manifestations of God. They often treated Maharaji more as a man and less as a god, and yet at the same time they could surrender more easily to him. For them, surrender was not a personal matter of ego, as it was for us. In the ground of stories about initial meeting described by some of Maharaji's closest Indian devotee, both the differences of the culture and the similarities of opening and love are apparent. I have known Maharaji since I came into this world. My father and my mother were both devotee. My father since 1940 and my mother since 1947. Because our parents were devotee and because he was always being discussed in our family, we were all born devotees of him. Ram. I first Maharaji in Bhavali many years ago. Maharaji frequently visited a certain mass house there. I told her that I had heard about him, but had never met him, and I asked her to tell me the next time he came. After a week or so, Maharaji came at night. In the morning, a message came from me, and I went at once. I found him laying on a cot. He looked at me, then closed his eyes for a moment. He knew at once who I had been before, and what I was going to do in this world. In a few seconds, he said, "I am very pleased to see you," which he repeated many times. Maharaji had walked from Nainital to Bhavali during the night. He said, "You have brought me here. I shall see you again in Haldwani." Then Maharaji boarded a bus to Almora. In those days, he travelled mostly by bus, not by car. People warned me not to take him seriously. Neem Karoli is a big liar. He very seldom tell the truth. You can't depend upon him. In any case, I went to Haldwani. After a few days, someone came to my room and told me that Maharaji had come to Haldwani and gave me his address. I was him then and have been with him ever since. Ram. I first met Maharaji in 1950 when I rode with my boss and Maharaji from Nainital to Haldwani. My boss, a government minister, was already a devotee of Maharaji and I had offered him this lift. But I was smoking and acting as if Maharaji was just another person. In 1958, after the death of my mother, I was in Bhowali with my father on vacation. He spent a night in the government rest house there, and my father became ill in the night, in much pain. They called the Bhovali doctor, who gave him an injection but no avail. The next day, doctor from Nainital came and said that he need an emergency gallbladder operation. That same day, I went to consult doctor at nearby TB sanatorium. Preparations were then underway for a puja, ritual of the prayer, to celebrate the opening of small Hanuman temple built by doctor there who was a devotee of Maharaji. I sat on the watch. Maharaji arrived but stayed hidden. I grew curious to meet him. I heard that Maharaji had put someone in a terrace, so I watched a while from a distance before leaving. That evening, a messenger from Nainital bus station came to me and told me to visit a certain Baba Neem Karoli. Since there were so many Babas, I dismissed the message. But at night, I went to the bus station and inquired as to who had sent this message, but no one knew. This aroused my curiosity even more. I asked where I could find this Baba Neem Karoli and went there. Maharaji said to me, "Your name is so and so, and your father is very ill. Yes, you thought he might die, but God had cured him. Doctor have told you that he should be operated on, but he shouldn't be. He'll be all right." Maharaji gave me 2 or 3 mangoes for my father, which I fed him, and he began to improve. After a few days, Maharaji again called me. I went but didn't touch his feet. I was planning to return to Delhi, and Maharaji said, "You are going to Delhi, you drive too fast. Take your father carefully, and he'll be all right." This touched my heart, and I touched Maharaji's feet. My father never had the operation and became very healthy with no relapse. Since I wasn't married, I was living with my brother and his wife. When Maharaji came to them, I went into the farthest room so I wouldn't have to be involved with such people. For I thought, sadhus, so are not good. After some time, Maharaji came into the room where I was. He walked in, sat down, and said, "Sadhus are not good." After that, I just became a devotee. One of Maharaji's closest devotee for the last 20 years gives the following account. In 1935, I was on vacation from school and went to Dakshinavara on a religious pilgrimage. When I reached the place where there were many Shiva temples, a man appeared before me who I had not noticed to be there before. "My son," the man said, "you are a Brahmin. I shall give you a mantra." I did not take it. I said, I do not believe in it. "You just take it," he insisted and said, and so I relented. Thereafter, I faithfully recited the mantra daily. Many years passed. It was June 1955. I had some close friends who were like members of the family. Every Sunday, we had chat in the evening at our house. Around 9 p.m., I saw my wife, aunt, and mother going out. I asked them where they were going, and they said just to an adjacent house and that some Baba was visiting. One of the fellow with me said, "Does he eat? I can arrange food for him." This fellow was a hunter. My my wife said, "You should not say things like that." In 10 minutes they returned. They reported that he had been sitting in a dirt hut but on oil lamp and had told them to go. When they didn't go, he said, "Go, your husband's Bengali friends have come. Go and serve them tea. I shall come in the morning." In the morning, my wife and I went over together. Maharaji was on a small cot in a tiny room. As we entered, he sprang up and looked my hand, saying, "Let's go." We felt so fast that my wife had to remove his sandals to keep up. He took us to our own house and said, "I shall stay with you." When the woman from the other house came to take him back, he would not go. Later he questioned me, "You are a devotee of Shiva?" "Yes." "You already have a mantra." It was at that moment that I realized it had been Maharaji who had given me the mantra 20 years before. Ram. My first meeting with him in Kanpur was short and sweet, perhaps only 2 minutes. I pranamed him, he asked me who I was and gave me his blessings and left. Where he went, nobody could say. I met him again 10 months or a year later in Lucknow. One by one he sent the many people who were sitting with him away until only we three were left. Then he asked my sister-in-law, "What do you want?" She said she had come only to pay her respect. Then he asked me, and I replied, "I only need your blessings, nothing more." Then he asked my wife, "You have come with positive questions. Why don't you ask them?" In fact, she had come with some questions which she didn't even confide in us, confide in us, but she had made a decision beforehand not to ask the questions herself. She wanted Maharaji to answer them unasked, and she wanted it done in private, so she didn't speak. She couldn't answer that she didn't have questions, but because of her decision she couldn't ask them. So Maharaji said to her, "You want me to answer your questions without your asking, and you want me to tell you when you are alone. You are putting a sadhu to a very hard test. Tomorrow I will come to your house in Kanpur and answer your questions." We sat there a few minutes more and then he said, "Go." As we were leaving, a doubt came to my mind that Maharaji had just sidetracked us by saying, "You had visit us tomorrow and answer the questions." At about 10 o'clock that evening, a message came to our house for a Maharaji's devotee who was visiting us. The message was that Babaji, familiar form of Baba, was coming to the devotee's house and he should return home right away. We accompanied him. As soon as I pranamed to Maharaji, he said, "You doubted my integrity, never doubt a sadhu. The burden is on him, not on you. You have you have not to doubt." I apologized to him. I had indeed doubted, but he said, "All right, tomorrow I'll come to your place." So the next morning he came over. As this was his first visit, I really didn't knew what to do. Others told me that nothing is to be done. Just provide a big pillow on a bed for him to lean on and offer some food or fruits or milk. He'll take whatever he feels like. He's the sweet. It's his sweet will. When he arrived, I escorted him to the sitting room. He said, "No, I wouldn't sit there. Let the other sit there. You take me to a small room." I was surprised and confused since I did not know which room he was referring to. He gave a description of the room and walked through the house as if he knew where the room was. I was following him, not lead him in our house. He went straight to the room and said, "Here, I want to sit." He said, "Call Ma, my wife." She came and he then answered all the questions she had in her mind. "Is there any question to which I haven't replied?" he asked. She had to say that there are no more. Ram. An ICS, the Indian Civil Service Commissioner of Lucknow, used to drink. The superintendent of police said to Maharaji that they should go visit him. Maharaji agreed, and when they arrived, the commissioner had a bottle hidden behind him. Maharaji hailed from the car. "What's the matter?" The commissioner was furious. He screamed at the superintendent, "Who have you brought here? He had no manners. Get him out there." The superintendent opened his holster and was about to shoot the commissioner for talking to Maharaji that way. But Maharaji blew up. "What are you doing? He is a great sant. You see only outside. He'll never come with you again." The commissioner later became a great devotee. He would come for darshan but sit outside by the shoes, for he felt that was his place. He eventually became head of the administrative officer school in Allahabad. At the end, he suffered from thrombosis. At the end, he suffered great agony but kept Ram Mantra, repetition of Ram, a name of God, going and was very gay. The superintendent was in tears when he visited him near the end. And he asked, "Should I call your wife and son?" The commissioner said, "No, this is not a time for attachment. At this time, all I have to do is remember Ram and Maharaji. Goodbye, we'll meet again." And he died. Ram. I had wanted to meet Maharaji for a long time but could never catch him. Finally, a friend came and took me in his company car to where Maharaji was supposed to be. There were four rooms and Maharaji was in far room. I went in. A minute. The minute I entered, Maharaji said, get out, you. So I went out and sat down, but wouldn't leave. I sat for many hours. Finally, my friend had to return the car because he was closing. It was closing time. Although my house was quite distant, I was determined to stay and have Maharaji's full darshan. Finally, someone took pity and said, "You aren't doing it right. When some people start to go in, you go in with them. And if it threw you out, wait and try again with the next people." I did so and was twice thrown out. Finally, the third time Maharaji said, "Come, sit here. What's your name? What do you do?" Then he said, "Okay, now go." But I said, "I'm not going. I haven't had darshan yet. I hadn't had a chance to discuss my problem with you." Maharaji said, "Now go and come at 6 a.m." So I went home and I couldn't sleep, and at 2 a.m. I got up and did puja. I was afraid Maharaji would leave before I got there. Then I arrived at the house at 6 a.m. Maharaji had already left. But they said he would return after some time. He did not come back. And then Maharaji and I spent many hours together. In fact, the rest of my life has been spent with Maharaji. Thank you so much for listening. Chapter 1, where various people have discussed about their stories, how they met Maharaji, how they experienced miracles of Maharaji, and how they ultimately became devotee of Maharaji. We'll continue with chapter 2 in next video. Thank you for listening. Keep supporting. Please do like, share, comment, and subscribe this channel, The Spiritual Magnet. Thank you very much.